Yeah.
Everyone, and I'm a software engineer. I run my own company, Space and Tabs. I do web and mobile development. And I'm here today to mainly tell you a story about how we shipped Women Tech SEO, the website for them. There is a lot to unpack in the story, so I am going to focus on the basics here. So it's mainly going to be a story about how to get the basics right and how getting these basics right gets you a lot of the way there. So Women Tech SEO had an old website. I also built it for them. The founder of the community is my wife, Farish, so I'm her tech guy. And the old website, as you see at the top here, the new website is down here. And when you look at it, you might not see like it's just a UI uplift. There isn't really much happening, but actually under the hood, a lot of it has changed to support this new thing we built. Just a bit of context. So the old website was basically a weekend project. We sat down together in a couple of days, got a template using Gatsby. Template is mainly a blog, so it had an about page, maybe a small blog, and we used it mainly to showcase some of the local meetup events that was happening at the time, and that was when the community is small scale. Right now, the community is much more than that. So we have different pages, such as the directory pages, which is a speakers hub, founders hub. So it had some interactivity, such as search and filtering and things like that. We added a whole lot more than blogs. So you have different type of blogs, different type of content, different type of conference. So when we had a look and decided to uplift the UI of the website, we also had a look at what we're using in terms of the content management and how our content modeling was doing, and the tech we're using to build the website. So a good question is, why start a rebuild? It looks like a fairly simple UI uplift, so why go through the process of doing all that and building it from scratch? Well, on the content side, the first thing is our content model wasn't really flexible. So we had all these pages, and every page had its own, what you can think of if you use Sanity, like a schema. So you had a conference schema, a blog post schema, a knowledge hub schema. All of them are almost the same, and we are just changing a bunch of fields here and there. So it's not ideal. It created a lot of duplication, and obviously something that's built in a weekend and then evolved really rapidly, it caused a lot of headaches. And soon enough, Gatsby stopped developing as well. So it was great when we started, but we're using static site generation, so the more pages we add, the slower it got. And obviously, once Netlify acquired it, things got a bit stale, so it wasn't moving or evolving. And the final nail in the coffin was content. It got really expensive. So we're in the free plan. It was working for us until they limited the content model, how many content models you need, and suddenly we were exceeding that limit and looking at a $300 bill per month, which is really quite expensive. So we really, like, it's not contentful fault, but we really needed to rethink how we model our content. So I'll talk a little bit about how we planned the migration. First thing is we looked at the templates we had. A lot of it was actually duplicated pieces and duplicated structures everywhere. So let's say, for example, you had a podcast and you had a blog. Both of them had a piece of rich text, and then in the podcast, you had an embed for the podcast player. So why do we have two different stick models for them? It wasted a lot of resources, added a bit of a headache in managing it on the content side. So what if we actually took a step deeper into it and figured out what are these models built from? So when you looked at the templates, this is not a real story, like a real image, but just an approximation. So when you look at the template, it's actually a bunch of smaller models, UI components, you say, that actually make up the template. So what if our content model is not necessarily mapping to a template, but instead our schema is just the UI components, and then we just render them to form a template? Similar to this, simply, like, even if you have a big template, you are building any kind of interactivity or a feature in your website, ultimately it boils down to a body with a bunch of sections in the middle, right? Your hero, your piece of content, and then maybe your related articles. That's just one example. So what if we shifted those templates and moved them to a content editing concept? not a development concern, not a content structure concern. We don't care about it when we are rendering a page. And with that in mind, that means when you have different variety and different, not variety, variations in the same component, it's not necessarily in a new template anymore. It's just tweaking a little fields in the content schema or the models that we have. This is a very simple example. It might not give you the full idea, but let's assume these are two separate templates, right? All of them have an image, have a title, and have a piece of text in the middle. In the old website, what we'd have done is had two distinct content structures for them, named them differently because they're used in two different places. But in reality, all what we needed to add is really a Boolean flag to mirror it, right? So these are part of why we just find we needed this rebuild to update all our content schemas and migrate them away from duplicated based on what variations we have into something that's more flexible that we can use to build templates on top. The next step in our migration really is moving away from complexity. So as I mentioned before, we're using Gatsby. Gatsby forces us to use React, but do we actually need React in this? We probably don't. We were perfectly happy, like the new website is perfectly happy with HTML, CSS, some JavaScript in some places, but it's mostly HTML and CSS, to be honest. And even the CSS, I use Tailwind. I'm a mobile developer, so don't blame me. And do we actually need a static site generation? So, I mean, I'm torn between that because even with us, well, spoiler alert, but we used Astro, so even with Astro, we can do static site generation, but it's actually proved more headache than it's worth because every update, you'll need it to rebuild the website, so you need to build some kind of a webhook mechanism or something to update your website. Every time you publish something, which I'm sure Sanity has great plugins to hook into Vercel or Netlify or whatever. But also the other headache is previews, because now you need to build your website, but have some kind of a server rendered version of it to support previews. So if it's already up and live, you might as well just serve it to the people. So yeah, with this in mind, we actually started on the implementation. So instead of just a fresh UI update and called it a day, we actually build it all from the ground up. So again, as I said, we used Astro, and I love Astro. I've been using it for a while now. From someone who doesn't really develop websites a lot, Astro is just really a fresh breeze of fresh air. Just HTML, CSS, no fuss. Very well documented. You can build like everything is in their documentation. Has really good plugins. And the best part about it, like I mentioned, is no looking UI framework. So you're not into React, you're not into Vue. If you want them, you can add them. If you don't, you still have your own HTML. They have hybrid mode as well. So if you want to statically generate sites, so Spaces and Tabs, my own company website, is actually Sanity with static site generation. But for Women in Tech SEO, we ended up using server-side rendering. So Astro really fit well with us because of its simplicity, and obviously that's why I'm here. And we use Sanity content management. And the big wins for us in using Sanity is actually the Sanity Studio. There is a whole lot of customization on it that we added. And it's like, for me at least, I felt it's really nice and really productive to have my schemas and everything defined in the same place where I actually do the rendering and write the code to render all these components. So it really fit well with my mental models and how we're working. And the query engine that Sanity has actually really helped us build this kind of page builder, because you don't know the parameters you are getting and what you want to pitch, because every page can have its own UI components. So it worked really well with how we query things, and I will give you a sneak peek of how we do actually the querying and how we avoid unnecessary calls later in the talk. So we are building a page builder on Sanity. So how do we structure the schema? I think I gave a bit of a brief overview early on. It's mainly we are focusing on UI components. We are not building templates. We are building UI components, and from that, templates become a separate concern for content editing, and we'll see how Sanity makes life easier in that as well, so we can bridge that gap. But I'll just walk you through some of the, I'm sure it's basic knowledge, but these basics is actually what set the project for success and made life easier for me as a developer and for the ONET Tech SEO team to edit their content and migrate it one by one. First thing is easy. It's just enforcing rules. If you have any fields that are optional, should be optional or not, make sure to add your rules in the schema. And that way, content editors can get this nice warnings when something go wrong. And you trust as a developer, you trust your own data that you are fetching, because you know that you put your rules in there, you know that when something is required, it's required and it's not going to go missing. There's a lot of the headaches. And something that we really lacked in the old website as well, we had some random values. Everything was almost optional. So you had quirky behavior in how things rendered. And other thing is really be descriptive. You have name, you have title, you have description. Use them to tell the content editors what exactly is this meant to do, especially in every field. So they have an idea on what they're trying to build. Obviously, you have your previews, but sometimes you just want filling the content early on. You don't want any misalignment. And yeah, next is choose sensible values for your previews. So I mean by this bit here, Sanity, the studio will pick up some default values for you if you don't define it right, which is a good start. But this data is contextual in where it is and what you are trying to build. So for example, if we are building a page here, I'd like to know what component I'm using or what component I'm editing. So you customize it to make sure that the preview gives you that subtitle, for example, in here in the head. So using sensible values for previews helped us make the content editing an easier, smoother experience. And shared UI elements have a schema for them. So if you don't have a design system, you still like to share some elements of UI here and there. And if you are already defining a schema for your UI components, you don't want to go about duplicating how a button looks, for example, like this button have a background or can have a border or can have an icon. And all these are shared, and you want to standardize that across all the UI components. So it's easier for you to build that and support that on a schema level. So content editors can reuse that and can update it once and goes in all your UI components rather than just copying the same fields over and over across the UI components. And limit the free-form inputs, especially for things that have specific values. So again, Sanity Studio and your schema definition will really help you in getting like drop-downs or checkboxes or radio boxes for whatever you need to. Again, it's all about removing any unknowns in the content editing journey, and as a developer, trusting the input you're getting. Like ultimately, you are getting a string, but if I know from the content editing side that I'm only getting this subset of strings, I can easily reason with that in my code and avoid any unnecessary edge case handling. And finally, do yourself a favor, do everyone a favor in your content editing team and enable previews. It's really easy to get the iframe up and running for us. There is a bit of logic to manage the perspectives and the tokens you are passing in to get this up and running. But once it is up and running, it's really helpful to avoid having a staging environment and a production environment, for example. You can leave everything on draft, renders a draft, and you can share feedback. And Studio is really amazing to have comments around and move and keep the collaboration going. So with all these in mind and the updates, we ended up having a structure similar to the one on the left. So we have one level, which is a shared UI components, such as your buttons, how your links, any requirements with images. We have a requirement that every image would have an alt text, for example. And to filter that through, we use the UI components directly in the other page blocks, I call them, or visual blocks. So for example, there is a form block or an author block or a header block. These reference the UI components and have their own fields. Usually, once you clear out the images, clear out the UI components, what you are left with is what type of text are you using. Is it a normal text, long text, or a portable text? Doesn't really leave you much variety, which is good for standardizing. Even for a page builder, you don't know what you are rendering, so you need to standardize as much as possible the contract between the content and what you are building. And this is what a page looks like now. So instead of having a template and a bunch of fields to make the template, a page just starts as an empty array, and you just fill it with the components you need. which is similar to any page builder you have right now. Like if you go to Squarespace or what have you, similar, you drag and drop, and then you fill each component individually. The good thing about this is just uses the designs and styles and the components that the content editors are familiar with, and they don't need to recreate it. And it's an environment where we can do more updates on, because how extensible the Sanity Studio is. So with that in mind, that's the Sanity part of it. How do we consume this data from Sanity? And I'm not going to go into a lot of details about how Astro integrates with Sanity. It's just a brief overview of the journey of a request, really. So we get a request. We only have one layout now because we eliminated all the different templates, all the different, everything that's configurable now is either coming from Sanity as a configuration by the content editors and whoever is maintaining the website, and either a built-in configuration coming from environment variables and things like that. So simplifies a lot of the code. We stripped out all the layouts that we had, all the different templates. It's only a single template, and this is where the head with all its metadata gets rendered. Makes it so much easier to reason with, especially around SEO, around open graph meta tags and all these things like that. And obviously it makes it easy to put your scripts as well, like if you're tracking with Google Analytics or what have you. Page layout just references a block renderer, which essentially takes in what you fetched from Sanity and renders it on the screen as visual components, and you end up with a nice list of visual blocks, and all right, you have the screen. A little bit of how we call Sanity. So the initial version of what we had basically fetched the page from Sanity, got your references, and then each reference resolved itself. So you are making subsequent calls. If you have 10 API requests, 10 components on the screen, you are making 10 plus 1 calls, which will consume your Sanity credits really fast. So the trick that we did here is to resolve the first level of references when we are fetching the page. That's why I was talking about having a flexible query, because it just makes life easier. Resolving that first level of references just gets you almost all the visual components that we need. There is a few visual components that has references to other visual components, and these can be resolved ad hoc. They are not that much. So best case scenario, in almost the majority of the pages, you have just one call to the Sanity API. Worst case scenario, you do the N+1, but these are pretty rare for us, so we're happy with that kind of performance. Another thing is separation between these visual blocks. So they don't know about each other, and they don't know about the UI components they are referencing. Everything calls the renderer recursively to render any children that they need about. And again, that way, it's one easy way to standardize everything and make sure that you only have one source of truth on how things is rendered, instead of copying that visual implementation in different places to cater for it. So that's really everything on how we ship it. There is a lot more details. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. You can find me and ask me any questions about Astro later on. But for now, I'll just leave you for what's next for the Women in Tech SEO website. With most of the updates that's coming next, hopefully we'll manage to do it, or I will manage to do it later for them, is going to revolve around content editing. So remember the screenshots I showed you earlier, where the page is just a block of items, right? Content editors still need to manage to work around templates. So one thing to add, I see not is initial value templates. So basically a fancy button that create a blog page that will basically create a page, add all the relevant blocks for them, so they can just fill in the content and don't have to worry about what visual component type I need to use here or there. Extension to that is improving the duplication behavior. Because we're using references, every page when you duplicate it, it carries over the references, which is not ideal if you are content editing and just want to duplicate a blog post and just update the content. You'll end up overwriting. So again, another duplicate button that will actually work on duplicating all the references as you go will be helpful for content editor. So that will be coming soon to their website. And finally, visual editing. I just saw it got recently merged into the Astro integration, so hopefully we'll get into that, because again, with the previews that we have, that will make content editing a lot easier. And that's it from me. Thank you so much. I have a written version of that talk, so if anyone wants reading. Thank you so much.